Hello, my name is Nathaniel Singer. I'm a fourth year undergraduate public affairs and history major. I'm presenting an abridged version of my history honors thesis entitled Soviet Simulacrum, the Almaty Metro and Kazakh Independence, which was done under the research advice of Dr. Milos Jovanovic at the UCLA History Department. Um, Before we have to talk about Almaty, we have to talk about the country that it's located in, Kazakhstan. It's a large nation on the Central Asian steppe, which is a large and relatively flat grassland, and has been the subject of various forms of Russian and Soviet colonialism since the mid 1800s. Kazakhstan, as we know it, is actually a new and a modern conception. Prior to Russian colonialism, the residents of Kazakhstan were largely tribal and largely nomadic, with very little interaction between tribes. However, especially under the early Soviet system, which included the Korenizatsiya or indigenization policy, Kazakhstan as a modern nation state was formed with a Kazakh language that was initially promoted. However, the entire nationality policy of Korenizatsiya was removed under Stalin in favor of a Russification, making the various nationalities of the Soviet Union more Russian. This was compounded by the fact that in the early 1930s, in Kazakhstan, as well as in Ukraine and parts of Russia, there was a famine that was incredibly devastating to Kazakh life, but also Kazakh livelihood. The famine killed many Kazakhs, of course, but the ones who survived found themselves unable to continue their nomadic way of life. They were either literally forced or economically forced into communal farms, cities, or industrial areas, unable to continue their nomadic way of life. Furthermore, after World War II, the Khrushchev government instituted the Virgin Lands Campaign, which has its own incredibly colonial set of language in the title alone, which essentially imported European Slavic peoples into the Kazakh steppe. So much so that actually for most of Kazakhstan's history in the Soviet Union, Kazakhs were outnumbered in their own republic by Russians and Slavs. This demographic problem remains an issue in modern day Kazakhstan, with a significant amount of Slavic peoples still constituting many of the republic's citizens to this day. Because of these factors, many have been quick to compare the Soviet Union to other historic colonial empires, such as the United States, Great Britain, or Belgium or France. However, it's important to note that the scholarship is still being debated as to whether or not the USSR engaged in colonialism and to what degree. It's important to note that the Soviets were motivated by the Bolshevik and socialist ideologies rather than a desire to subjugate people they felt as racially inferior. They did oftentimes refer to the Kazakhs as backwards or undeveloped, but it's important to note that they also referred to Russians and Ukrainians and Polish people, and all of the various ethnicities and nationalities within the Soviet Union as undeveloped and backward as well. So their motivating factor was a genuine sense of progress and modernization rather than some racial ideology that was meant purely to serve economic interests in the metropole. Actually, in the case of Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan was the last nation to leave the Soviet Union after Russia, actually. The Kazakhs, after the Virgin Lands Campaign, were on the receiving ends of a great deal of beneficial development under the Soviet system, and many Kazakhs still long for those days when they were on the receiving end of a lot of positive developments through the Soviet Union. One of these positive developments was the construction of a metro, and in general, the creation of Almaty as a city. Under Russian colonial rule, Almaty was a small military fort known as Vierny, but within about a 60-year time period, it had grown from having a couple of thousand residents into over a million. And due to the way that the Soviet metro policy worked, once a city had over a million people, they were granted the ability to construct a metro, and that is just what they did in 1998. However, that proved to be a very unfortunate time period to go into any major construction projects, as the Soviet Union collapsed 3 years later in 1991. This period was incredibly difficult across the Soviet Union for its various economic effects, as it was the largest decrease in life expectancy in peacetime in world history, which was a problem for all of the former republics, But in addition, in Kazakhstan, you had this unique issue on top of that, which is they now had to deal with their own brand new national conception of, well, what even is Kazakhstan and what does it mean to be a Kazakh? Something that they didn't have the same deal of frustration with in a place like Armenia, for example. Uh, the Soviets engaged in metro construction for the same reasons that any other state engages in metro construction. It's an incredibly efficient way of moving a lot of people in a dense urban environment. However, the Soviets also recognized that large infrastructure projects and the design surrounding them is a very good way of indicating and promoting certain ideologies. So, in the case of the Moscow Metro, which was the first and remains the grandest of the Soviet metros, they recognized that by including incredibly expensive building materials and incredibly ornate designs, they could communicate both the power of Soviet ideology as well as the emphasis on the working of the common man. It's said by one of the Moscow Metro construction workers that there was more marble used in the construction of the Moscow Metro than in all of the Tsar's palaces combined. And these incredibly ornate metro stations, pictured here as one in Moscow, is a prime example of the representational power of Soviet metros. Despite the fact that the metro construction stalled in the 1990s as a result of the recession, at the turn of the century, Kazakhstan was experiencing an economic boom, in large part due to the increased exploitation of their natural gas reserves, which are abundant in Kazakhstan. The capital of Kazakhstan was moved into the center of the country, into what was then called Astana and is now called Nur-Sultan. But Almaty remains the largest city in terms of population, as well as a financial and a cultural center. In addition, since construction already started, it was cheaper to continue construction in Almaty rather than end construction entirely. So after more money was brought into federal government coffers, construction resumed in the early 2000s, and it was finally complete in 2011. The completed metro is really the core of what's very interesting about this entire project. One of the most interesting factors is the use of tokens. Most cities around the world have gotten rid of the use of tokens by the mid 90s and at the very latest, the early 2000s. Certainly, no new metro construction has included the use of tokens. However, there's one exception to this, which is Kazan in Russia, in what is Tatarstan, the only other case of a brand new metro being constructed with tokens. So the fact that the Almaty metro, which was constructed with tokens, as you can see in the top right yellow token in this photo, uh, shows that there is still some Soviet and/or Russian legacy being left behind in the infrastructure of the Almaty metro. It is baked into the built environment, whereas every other city in the world only uses tokens as a historical vestige rather than a new system. But it doesn't stop at just tokens. The actual construction, the building of the metro, is remarkably similar to its Soviet counterparts. In the left image, we see on the above section the Abai escalator station in Almaty, and in the bottom image, we see a set of escalators in Kiev, in Ukraine. In the middle image, at the top, we see the Almaty station in Almaty, and in the bottom middle photo, we see a photo of a station from the Yerevan metro in Armenia. And in the right, in the top section, we see a drawing of the Rhinebeck station from the Soviet era in the late 80s when the metro began construction. And in the bottom, we see a photo of the completed Rhinebeck station in 2011. Through the similarity of the architecture and the infrastructure in Almaty to its Soviet counterparts, despite the Almaty metro being constructed almost entirely during the independence period, we see a desire to remain aligned with the Russian and/or Soviet way of doing things, and we see a clear continuation in the construction and the mindset of those who built the metro at all levels of the government. This is what makes the Almaty metro so fascinating, is that it is a modern metro built according to a Soviet design philosophy. Uh, Thank you very much. I would like to thank my research advisor, Dr. Milos Jovanovic, for tremendous amounts of help, as well as Professor Jared McBride for assisting me with the Soviet history sections, as well as Dr. Kevin Kim for introducing me to the history honors thesis in the first place. Thank you very much.